The palace of the Valorian Empire stood tall against the purple sky, its crystal spires catching the light of 3 moons above the peaceful world of Valoria Prime. And inside the grand halls, servants moved quietly as they prepared for the most important diplomatic summit in a generation. Emperor Kaelvex sat upon his throne, his forearms folded across his chest as he watched the delegations from 7 different species mingle in the great hall below. And his compound eyes tracked each movement with the precision of a ruler who had survived 3 assassination attempts. The Draxons had sent their fiercest diplomat, Ambassador Thrix, a reptilian giant who stood nearly 3 meters tall with scales like black armor and teeth that could crush bone. And beside them stood the delicate Luminari with their glowing skin and the stocky Gorthons with their stone-like flesh, but it was the smallest delegation that caught the attention of many. The humans, there were only 5 of them, led by Ambassador Sarah Chun, a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile that seemed genuine even to species who could not read human expressions. And beside her stood her security detail, 4 soldiers in simple gray uniforms who carried no visible weapons. One of them was Commander Park Min-jun, a man of average height with short black hair and a face marked by old scars that ran from his left eyebrow down to his jaw. And he stood perfectly still, watching everything with dark eyes that missed nothing. The Emperor had welcomed them all with the traditional Valorian greeting, and the summit had proceeded smoothly for 3 days. But something was wrong in his own home. His daughter, Princess Univex, had stopped eating. She refused to leave her chambers, and when her caretakers tried to bring her to meals, she cried and begged to stay hidden. And the Emperor had grown worried beyond measure tonight. He left the diplomatic functions early to visit her himself. He found her in her room, curled beneath her sleeping silks, with her wings wrapped tightly around her small body. And the sight broke his heart in ways he could not express. "Little star," he said softly, using the name he had called her since she hatched. "What troubles you so deeply that you hide from your own father?" She peeked out from the silks, her large eyes wet with tears, and she trembled as she looked toward the door, as if expecting something terrible to burst through. "Is someone hurting you?" the Emperor asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone. "Has one of the delegates threatened you or spoken cruelly?" She shook her head quickly. "Then what is it, my child?" he asked, sitting beside her bed and reaching out with one gentle hand to stroke her antenna. "You can tell me anything, and I will make it right. I swear this to you." Princess Univex looked up at her father with such fear that it made his blood run cold, and she whispered in a voice barely louder than a breath. "The warrior," she said. "The human warrior scares me." The Emperor blinked in confusion, his mind immediately going to Ambassador Thrix, the massive Draxon who had fought in 3 wars and was known across the galaxy as a brutal negotiator. "Do you mean Ambassador Thrix?" he asked gently. "The tall one with the scales and the—" "No," the princess cried out, shaking her head so hard her antenna wobbled. "Not him. Dad, I am afraid of that human warrior." She pointed toward the window, toward the garden where the Emperor knew the human delegation often walked in the evenings, and he understood that she meant Commander Park Min-jun. "The human?" the Emperor asked, unable to hide his surprise. "But little star, he's so small compared to the others. He has no claws, no fangs, no armor on his skin. He is scary," the princess insisted, fresh tears running down her face. "I saw him in the garden, and I saw his scars. And I remembered what Teacher Brix showed us about the humans. And I am so scared, father." The Emperor held his daughter close, letting her cry against his chest while his mind raced with questions. And when she finally fell asleep from exhaustion, he carefully laid her down and covered her with the silks. Before leaving her room, he walked directly to the intelligence chamber, where his most trusted advisors waited at all hours. And he found High Advisor Venkex already studying reports at the central console. "I need everything we have on a human called Park Min-jun," the Emperor commanded. "I need it now." Venkex's fingers moved across the console, pulling up classified files from the Galactic military database. And what appeared on the screen made both Valorians freeze in place by the ancestors. Venkex whispered the file was thick with commendations, battle reports, and intelligence assessments from a dozen different species. And at the top of the document was a single designation that made the Emperor's 4 hearts beat. Faster CLASSIFICNO. Extreme threat, known alias. The Demon of Caraxes 7 species. Human Terran. Status: Active Duty Human Alliance Special FORC. Emperor stared at the image of the quiet, unassuming man who had bowed politely to him just that morning. And he realized that his daughter had seen something that he had completely missed. "Tell me everything," he ordered, and as Venkex began to read the files aloud, the Emperor understood for the first time why so many species whispered about humanity with fear in their voices, not because of what humans looked like, but because of what they were willing to do. High Advisor Venkex stood before the holographic display, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled up file after file. And Emperor Kale Vex watched in growing horror as the true nature of Commander Park Min-jun was revealed. 3 years ago, Venkex began, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to share. The Varax Collective operated the largest child trafficking ring in the Outer Territories, and they had built a fortress on a dead moon called Caraxes 7. The display showed images of the moon, a gray, lifeless rock orbiting a dying star. The perfect hiding place for those who wished to do evil, far from the eyes of law. They took children from 12 different species, Venkex continued, including 7 Valorian younglings who were stolen from a transport vessel near the border. The Emperor felt his blood turn to ice, and he remembered that terrible time when families across his empire had mourned their lost children, and he had been powerless to help them. The Galactic Council sent 3 rescue missions, Venkex said, and all 3 failed. The Varax defenses were too strong, their soldiers too many, and the location too well hidden. Then how did it end? The Emperor demanded. Venkex pulled up a new file, and the symbol of the Human Alliance appeared on the screen alongside the emblem of their Special Forces Division. The humans did not ask permission from the Council, Venkex explained, and they did not wait for approval or support. They simply went. The display showed tactical footage from helmet cameras, grainy and dark, and the Emperor watched as a small team of 8 humans approached the fortress. Under cover of darkness, Commander Park led the team, Venkex said. And what happened next has become required study for military academies across 47 worlds. The footage showed the humans breaching the fortress walls with explosives. And then the fighting began in earnest. The Emperor had seen combat footage before, but nothing like this. The Varax soldiers were large and well-armed, covered in natural armor plating that could stop most energy weapons. And they outnumbered the humans by at least 20 to 1. But the humans did not stop. The footage showed Commander Park taking a blade to his shoulder that cut through muscle and scraped bone. And he simply kept fighting, ripping the weapon from the Varax soldier and using it to cut down 3 more enemies. Humans do not feel pain the way other species do, Venkex explained, his voice filled with something between awe and terror. Or rather, they feel it, but they can choose to ignore it. Through sheer will, their bodies produce chemicals that allow them to continue functioning through injuries that would incapacitate any other known species. The footage continued, showing the team fighting through corridor after corridor. And one by one, the humans fell not dead, but wounded so severely that they could no longer advance by the time they reached the holding cells where the children were kept. Only 3 humans remained standing, and Commander Park was one of them. The Varax commander offered them a deal, Menkek said quietly. Surrender and the children would be released unharmed. And the humans accepted? The Emperor asked, though something in his chest told him he already knew the answer. No. Your Majesty, Venkex replied. Commander Park told the Varax commander that there would be no deals, no negotiations, and no mercy. He said that anyone who hurts children does not deserve the chance to surrender. The footage showed what happened next, and the Emperor found himself unable to look away. Park fought like nothing the Valorians had ever seen, not with grace or elegance, but with a brutal efficiency that spoke of one single purpose. And that purpose was the destruction of everything that stood between him and those children when his weapons ran empty. He used his hands when his hands were broken. He used his body as a shield. The Varax commander died with Park's fingers around his throat. And the human did not let go until long after the alien had stopped moving. He carried 17 children out of that fortress. Venkek said, 7 Valorians, 4 Luminari, 3 Gorthons, and 3 others from species we had no treaties with at the time. He carried them one by one through 2 kilometers of hostile territory, while bleeding from wounds that should have killed him. The final image showed Commander Park standing at the extraction point, his uniform soaked in blood, both his own and that of his enemies, with a small Valorian child clinging to his neck. The humans returned to that moon 2 weeks later. Venkex continued with a full military force, and they destroyed everything, every ship, every building. Every record of the Varax collective was erased from existence. The Emperor stared at the frozen image of the blood-soaked human warrior holding a Valorian child, and he finally understood what his daughter had seen. She recognized the scars, he said quietly. Yes, Your Majesty, Venkex confirmed. Princess Univex has been studying galactic history with her tutor, and the rescue of Caraxes 7 is part of the curriculum. She must have seen the footage and recognized Commander Park when she encountered him in the gardens. The Emperor sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything he had learned, and his 4 hearts beat with conflicting emotions. Fear. Yes, the humans were more dangerous than he had ever imagined, but also something else. Something that felt like gratitude mixed with profound respect. He saved our children, the Emperor said finally. He did, Venkex agreed. And he nearly died doing it. The Emperor rose from his seat and walked toward the door, his mind made up about what he needed to do next. Where are you going, Your Majesty? Venkex asked. To speak with the demon, the Emperor replied, and to understand the man behind the monster. The palace gardens glowed softly under the light of 3 moons, and the air was thick with the sweet scent of night-blooming flowers that only opened when darkness fell across Valoria Prime Emperor. Kaelvex walked the winding paths alone, having dismissed his guards at the entrance, despite their protests, and he searched for the human warrior who had become the subject of his thoughts. He found Commander Ponk Minjun standing beside a small pond, watching the luminescent fish swim in lazy circles beneath the surface. And the human did not turn around even though he surely heard the Emperor approaching. You are off duty, the Emperor said, stopping a few meters away. Yet you stand guard in my gardens instead of resting with your fellow humans. Old habits, Park replied, his voice calm and even. I find it difficult to sleep when there are people nearby who might need protection. The Emperor moved closer, studying the human in the moonlight. And he saw now what he had missed before, the way Park's eyes never stopped moving, scanning the shadows for threats. The way his body remained perfectly balanced and ready to move at any moment. My daughter fears you, the Emperor said directly. Seeing no reason to approach the topic with careful words, Park's shoulders dropped slightly. And when he finally turned to face the Emperor, there was no anger in his expression, only a deep and terrible sadness that seemed far too heavy for such a young face. I know, Park said quietly. I saw her in the garden 3 days ago, and I watched the fear enter her eyes the moment she recognized me. I have been staying away from the areas she frequents since then. You knew and said nothing? The Emperor asked. What would I say, Your Majesty? Park replied with a small shake of his head. That the scary human promises not to hurt the little princess. Those words mean nothing when the fear is already there. The Emperor considered this response, finding wisdom in it that he had not expected, and he gestured toward a nearby bench carved from white stone. Sit with me, he said. I wish to understand something. Park hesitated for only a moment before following the Emperor to the bench, and they sat together in the silver moonlight, like two old friends rather than a ruler and a foreign soldier. I have seen the files, the Emperor began. I know what you did on Caraxes 7, and I know why they call you the demon. What I do not understand is why I fought. Park asked, why you fight at all? The Emperor clarified. You humans are so fragile compared to other species. Your bones break easily, your skin tears. You have no natural weapons or armor, yet you throw yourselves into battles that seem impossible, and you refuse to stop even when your bodies fail you. Park was silent for a long moment, staring up at the 3 moons as if searching for the right words among the stars. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memories too painful to forget. I had a sister once, he said. Her name was Park Sumin, and she was 7 years old when the traffickers came to our colony on the Outer Rim. The Emperor listened without interruption, sensing that this was a story the human rarely told. I was 12, Park continued. Old enough to understand what was happening, but too young and too weak to stop it. I hid in a storage container while they took her, and I listened to her scream my name as they dragged her away. His hands had curled into fists, and even in the dim light, the Emperor could see the old scars across his knuckles from years of fighting. They never found her, Park said. The authorities searched for months, but the traffickers had connections everywhere. And eventually the case went cold. My parents never recovered, and my father died of a broken heart 2 years later. I'm sorry, the Emperor said, and he meant it with all 4 of his hearts. I joined the military the day I turned 18, Park continued, and I made myself into something that could fight back. I trained until my body broke, and then I trained more until it became stronger than it was before. He turned to look at the Emperor, and his dark eyes held a fire that had never gone out. I fight because somewhere out there's another 12-year-old boy hiding in a storage container, listening to his sister scream, and maybe, if I am fast enough and strong enough and willing to bleed enough, I can reach her before she disappears forever. The Emperor felt something shift in his understanding of this human, and he saw past the scars and the reputation to the wounded child still living inside the warrior. The children on Caraxes 7, the Emperor said softly. You saved them because you could not save her. I saved them because no one saved her, Park corrected gently. And because every child I bring home is a promise that I will never stop looking, never stop fighting, never stop trying to make the galaxy a little bit safer for the small and the innocent. They sat in silence for a while. 2 fathers in their own way, one who had nearly lost a daughter to fear, and one who had lost a sister to darkness. I will stay away from the princess, Park offered finally. I do not wish to cause her any more distress, and my presence here is not worth her peace of mind. No, the Emperor said firmly, surprising even himself with the strength of his response. You will not hide from my daughter, and she will not hide from you. Park looked at him with confusion. She fears what she does not understand, the Emperor explained. And the only cure for that kind of fear is understanding. Tomorrow, you will meet her properly, and you will show her the man behind the monster. And if she is still afraid? Park asked. The Emperor smiled, a rare expression for a ruler who would learn to keep his emotions hidden. Then we will try again, he said. Because that is what fathers do. We keep trying until our children, are no longer afraid. The royal nursery had been Princess Univex's favorite room in the entire palace since she was old enough to crawl. Filled with soft cushions and colorful toys and windows that let in the warm light of the Valorian sun. But today, she sat in the corner with her wings pulled tight against her back, watching the door with wide and frightened eyes as her father led the human warrior into her sanctuary. "Little star," the Emperor said gently, kneeling beside her while Commander Park remained near the entrance. "I have brought someone I would like you to meet properly." The princess pressed herself further into the corner, her small hands gripping a stuffed creature that resembled a six-legged feline, and she shook her head so hard that her antenna trembled. "He is scary," she whispered. "I saw what he did on the videos, Father. I saw him hurt those bad people." The Emperor looked back at Park, who had not moved from his position by the door, and he saw the pain flash across the human's scarred face before it was quickly hidden behind a mask of calm. "May I try something, Your Majesty?" Park asked quietly. The Emperor nodded. Park did something that surprised both Valorians. He lowered himself to the ground, not just kneeling but sitting with his legs crossed, making himself as small as possible. And then he bowed his head so that he was looking at the floor rather than at the princess. "Princess Univex," he said in a soft voice. "My name is Park Min-jun, and I want you to know that it is okay to be afraid of me." The princess blinked, clearly not expecting those words. "I have done scary things," Park continued, still not looking up. "I have fought bad people, and I have hurt them badly. And I have scars that remind me of every battle I have survived. It makes sense that someone who has seen what I can do would be frightened." He slowly raised his head, meeting the princess's eyes with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone with such a fearsome reputation. "But I would like to tell you something important," he said. "Something that I hope will help you understand why I do the scary things I do." The princess did not respond, but she had stopped trembling, and her grip on the stuffed toy had loosened just a little. Park reached up and touched the scar that ran from his eyebrow to his jaw, tracing the raised line of tissue with his finger. "This scar," he said. "I got this one while carrying a little Valorian boy named Trix Voss to safety. A bad person tried to stop me, and they cut my face, but I did not let go of Trix Voss. Not even for a moment." He pulled back the sleeve of his uniform to reveal another scar, this one wrapping around his forearm like a twisted rope. "This one," he continued, "I got when I jumped in front of a Luminari girl to protect her from an explosion. The metal cut my arm very badly, but she did not get hurt at all, and that is the only thing that mattered to me." The princess had begun to lean forward, her natural curiosity starting to overcome her fear, and she watched as Park revealed scar after scar, each with its own story of a child saved. "I have many scars," Park said, "and every single one of them came from protecting someone who could not protect themselves. I'm scary because I fight monsters. Real monsters. The kind of people who would hurt children and steal them away from their families." He reached into his pocket slowly, making sure the princess could see his movements, and he pulled out a small object that caught the light, a pendant made of colored string woven into the shape of a star. "A little girl gave this to me after I helped rescue her from a very bad place," Park explained. "She made it herself while she was waiting for someone to come save her, and when I carried her out into the sunlight, she put it in my hand and said thank you." He held out the pendant toward the princess, not forcing it on her but simply offering. "I keep it with me always," he said, "to remind me why I fight, why I let myself become something scary, because sometimes the only thing that can stop a monster is another monster, one who has chosen to protect the innocent instead of hunting them." Princess Univex uncurled from her corner, moving forward on hands and knees until she was close enough to see the pendant clearly, and she stared at the simple woven star with wonder in her eyes. "You fight monsters?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "I do," Park confirmed. "Would you fight monsters for me?" she asked, looking up at his scarred face with an expression that was no longer pure fear. Park smiled, and the expression transformed his face into something almost warm, despite the old wounds marking his skin. "I already would," he said. "That is why I am here, to make sure no monsters ever come near you or your father or anyone else on this beautiful world." The princess reached out with one small hand, her fingers hovering just above Park's scarred knuckles, and she looked to her father for permission. The emperor nodded, his forehead swelling with pride at his daughter's courage. Princess Univex touched the human's hand gently, feeling the rough texture of old scars beneath her fingertips. And she did not flinch or pull away. "You are not so scary up close," she said thoughtfully. "You just look sad." Park laughed softly, and there were tears in his eyes that he did not try to hide. "Sometimes the scariest people are just the saddest," he admitted. "But that does not make them dangerous to those they love." The moment was broken by a sound that made all three of them freeze. A deep, rumbling alarm that echoed through the palace walls, followed by the distant thunder of explosions. The emperor leaped to his feet, his training taking over as he moved toward the door. But Park was faster. The human was already standing, his body positioned between the princess and the entrance, and his eyes had gone cold and hard. "Stay behind me," Park commanded, his voice no longer soft but sharp as a blade. "Both of you." The princess grabbed her father's leg with one hand and Park's sleeve with the other, and she realized with sudden clarity that she was no longer afraid of the human warrior. She was afraid of whatever had made him look like that. The palace shook as another explosion ripped through the eastern wing, and the beautiful crystal spires that had stood for 1,000 years began to crack and fall like broken dreams, shattering against the ground. Commander Park Min-jun moved through the Funjun corridors with the Emperor and Princess Univex close behind him, his body tense and ready for combat while his eyes scanned every shadow and doorway for threats. "The Varax remnants," he said grimly. "They have been hunting me since Caraxes 7. And they must have followed the diplomatic convoy to your world. This is my fault. We can assign blame later," the Emperor replied, his forearms carrying weapons that have been hidden beneath his ceremonial robes. "Right now we need to reach the safe room in the central tower." They turned a corner and found their path blocked by rubble from a collapsed ceiling, and the sounds of fighting grew louder from somewhere ahead. Energy weapons discharging, and soldiers shouting in languages from across the galaxy. "This way," Park said, guiding them down a side passage. But before they could reach the end, a group of Varax soldiers burst through a doorway. There were 6 of them, massive creatures covered in natural armor, plating with weapons built into their very bodies. And they roared with triumph when they saw the human they had been seeking, the demon. One of them howled, "Kill the demon and take the emperor alive. The princess will fetch a high price on the markets." Park did not wait for them to attack. He moved like water and struck like thunder, closing the distance before the Varax could raise their weapons. And his first blow crushed the throat of the nearest soldier with a sound like breaking stone. The emperor tried to join the fight, but Park shouted over his shoulder without breaking his rhythm of violence, "Protect your daughter." So the emperor pulled Princess Univex into his arms and pressed against the wall, shielding her small body with his own, while the human fought 6 enemies at once. It was not a graceful battle, not the kind of elegant combat shown in entertainment programs where warriors danced around each other with perfect form, but something far more brutal and desperate. Park took a blade to his side that would have killed a Valorian instantly, and he simply grabbed the arm holding it and broke the limb at 3 different joints before using the stolen weapon to cut down its owner. Another Varax slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack the stone, And Park responded by driving his thumbs into the creature's eyes until it released him screaming. By the time the sixth Varax fell, Park was bleeding from wounds across his entire body, his uniform torn and soaked with blood, both his own and that of his enemies. And he stood swaying among the corpses like a ghost that refused to acknowledge death. "We need to move," he said, his voice strained but still commanding. "There will be more." They continued through the burning palace. And twice more they encountered Varax soldiers. And twice more Park threw himself into combat with no regard for his own survival. Second group landed a shot from an energy weapon that burned through his shoulder. And the third managed to break several of his ribs with a crushing blow that would have pulped the organs of most species. But Park kept fighting, kept moving, kept placing himself between the princess and every threat that emerged from the smoke and chaos. Finally, they reached a junction where the corridor split in 3 directions, and Park stopped, leaning against the wall while blood dripped from his fingertips to pool on the floor. "The safe room is through the left passage," the Emperor said. 50 meters ahead. Park nodded, then pushed himself off the wall and stood in the center of the junction, facing the direction from which sounds of pursuit echoed through the halls. "Take your daughter and go," he said. "You cannot stay here alone," the Emperor protested. "You will die." Park turned his head slightly, and despite the pain that must have been consuming him, he smiled at the princess, who was watching him with tears streaming down her small face. "Remember what I told you," he said to her. "I fight monsters so they cannot hurt the people who matter. Now go with your father and let me do what I was made for." "No," Princess Univex cried out, struggling against her father's grip. "You cannot leave him, father. He is my monster, and I will not let him die alone." The Emperor hesitated, torn between his duty to protect his daughter and the warrior who had bled for them both. But the choice was taken from him when a fresh wave of Varax soldiers appeared at the far end of the corridor. There were at least 20 of them, too many for even Park Min-jun to defeat in his current state. And they charged forward with weapons raised and hatred in their eyes. Park braced himself to meet them, knowing that this would be his final stand. But then new sounds filled the corridor, the disciplined thunder of organized forces approaching from multiple directions, and the Varax found themselves suddenly surrounded by Valorian royal guards and the other members of the human delegation. Ambassador Chen herself led the counterattack, a weapon in her hands and fury on her face, and beside her the other human soldiers fought with the same impossible determination as their commander. The battle was brief and brutal. And when the last Varax fell, the corridor fell silent except for the heavy breathing of survivors. Park collapsed to his knees, his body finally acknowledging the damage it had sustained. And Ambassador Chen rushed to support him before he could hit the ground. "Medics!" the Emperor shouted. "I need medics here now." Princess Univex broke free from her father's arms and ran to where Park had fallen, dropping beside him and grabbing his bloody hand in both of her own. "You cannot die," she commanded him with all the authority a small princess could muster. "I forbid it. You are my monster, and I did not give you permission to leave." Park laughed weakly, blood on his lips, and he squeezed her hand with what little strength remained. "As you command, Princess," he whispered. The medics arrived and took him away, and the Emperor stood in the ruined corridor with his daughter pressed against his leg, both of them watching the human warrior who had given everything to protect them. 3 days later, Park Min-jun woke in the royal medical bay to find a small Valorian flower resting on his chest, a bloom of pure white that the Valorians gave only to those they considered family. Beside his bed sat Princess Univex, and she smiled when his eyes opened. "I decided you are not scary anymore," she informed him seriously. "You are just brave and sad and very stubborn. And Father says that means you fit right in with our family." Park lifted the flower carefully, understanding its significance. and he felt tears he had not cried in years running down his scarred face. "Thank you," he managed to say. "Do not thank me yet," the princess replied. "Father is giving you a medal today, and there will be speeches. And you have to wear a fancy uniform. That is your punishment for scaring me before. I knew you were one of the good monsters." Park laughed. And for the first time since he was 12 years old, hiding in a storage container, listening to his sister scream, the weight on his heart felt just a little bit lighter, and across the galaxy, the story spread of the demon of Caraxes 7, who had become the guardian of a Valorian princess, of the monster who fought other monsters, and of the truth that so many species were only beginning to understand: fear the humans. Yes, but never if you were small or weak, or lost, for they are the monsters who hunt other monsters, and they will bleed oceans to bring the innocent home.